David Hua, welcome to Shrink Wrap Radio.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to see your smiling face. I first saw it at the technology conference that was called the World Fair. Nano, right, as in nanotechnology, that was held down in San Francisco. And you were one of the speakers. They had a speaker every 20 minutes. You were one of the speakers. And you had such a big smile and you were so charismatic. And I approached you right afterwards and said, hey, I want you on my podcast. And I wondered, how am I going to rationalize this? I just like this guy. I want him on the podcast. He's a business guy, and he's talking about the business of marijuana. I'm not sure how we'll make that fit. But then I remembered that marijuana is a lot about consciousness and consciousness changing, et cetera. So I think that's enough to shoehorn you in here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so too. I agree. Cannabis has a lot of psychological effects that we can get into.
Yeah, good. Well, let me start off real personal and ask you, when did you first get experience with marijuana?
In high school. That's when I started, consuming.
Yeah, not too surprising.
And, it was one. Yeah, it was, I wasn't much of a big drinker in high school or college. For me, cannabis was, the thing that opened me up to other experiences. And that's when I first got experience to it. I think a lot of it was around the music. Just listening to music high was I could hear every note. I could hear the layers of, I could follow the guitar riffs. It gave me a whole new appreciation for music.
Oh, sure. I totally understand myself. My first experiences, I was already in graduate school at the University of Michigan.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
nice.
Maybe we'll get into that at some point, but I had those experiences definitely. And, but you actually, you're in business now, and you had some early business experience I saw on your resume somewhere. I haven't exactly seen your resume. I don't know where I got from what you sent your bio.
Sure.
You actually were a trader for Citigroup for a while.
Yeah,
I
went to Penn State, so Big Ten. When we graduated, I ended up going to work in New York.
Okay.
And so I worked at Citigroup in sales and trading, primarily around Latin American equities and foreign exchange.
Okay. Well, one of my sons, as it happens, is currently a bond trader for Bank of America in New York City.
Ah, yeah. Well, so, I'm assuming he came from did he come from Merrill Lynch, or he was at B of A from before?
No, I'm going to forget the sequence. He moved quickly through a lot of different places.
Yeah.
He was with the Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, for a while. I think that's where he kind of got his start. And then he did some internships at some of the other stock places. And it was kind of a surprise that he went that way, but he's enjoying the work a lot.
Yeah.
And we went to Penn State. I went to the University of Pennsylvania as an undergraduate. So
oh, okay.
We both know Pennsylvania to some extent.
My hometown's Philadelphia, so.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Yeah, I was there for 4 years and had a lot of interesting experiences there. So when did you decide to get involved with, I like your choice of cannabis rather than marijuana, saying marijuana. It's cannabis.
It's cannabis.
When did you get involved with cannabis, or, get the idea that you wanted to bring your business experience to cannabis?
This was in 2014. In January 2014, Colorado started going legal. And, it was the implementation of the laws that came, a couple years before that. But you could see that there was momentum. these markets that were going legal and having regulated environment. And so from there, February, I enrolled into Oaksterdam University. Oaksterdam is one of the first like cannabis colleges in the country. It's based in Oakland. It's taught by professors who are active in the space. So whether it's an attorney that argues for their clients in the space, or a dispensary owner running a dispensary, or a grower or hash maker and edible maker, it's a fantastic course to really get behind the curtain on how everything's working.
Wow. Was there tuition, or was it like a free university?
No, it was tuition. I ended up doing the boot camps. So I did a few of the boot camps, which compressed the material into a week or a weekend long course, all day. But I ended up seeing a huge need for software. Having been in San Francisco for the last 10 years now, and seeing us build for different industries, this industry was no different. The thing was, California was operating under Prop 215, and we didn't know at the time whether or not we would go and vote for legalization and have a new set of laws. But that ended up happening in 2016, and here we are in 2018 with the laws having changed. So
you're a programmer or software developer in addition to your other skills?
I am not a software developer. I definitely have dabbled and have an experience, committing code, but my three co-founders, Harrison, Scott, and Rick, are the engineers.
I like that expression, committing code. Sounds like a crime. It sounds like a crime.
No, committing code. We all worked together previously at a company called Sincerely, where the mission was to make a more thoughtful world by creating apps that allowed people to send like greeting cards, physical cards, but using their phone, or sending gifts.
Yeah.
And, so that's where I met them, and we started working on Meadow in 2014.
Yeah, Meadow. The website is getmeadow.com, right?
Yeah. Getmeadow.com was our first product. The idea was to order cannabis directly to your door from a local dispensary to get it delivered in an hour or less.
Yeah. We'll talk more about that as we go along. You look like a pretty young and healthy specimen there, but as medical marijuana played a role in your life somehow, something in the presentation that you gave hinted at that, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think physical health is just as important as mental health. For me, cannabis, helps provide a different perspective on how I approach things. And, from the standpoint of being active, oftentimes cannabis can help with either, if it's jujitsu, you can have more creativeness in your movements. If it's yoga, you have ability of stretching and kind of like focusing on your muscles and your ability to open. If it's, just jump roping and listening to music, you can just zone out and go. So it helps in all of those sort of areas.
Okay. But you never had to take quotes medical marijuana for an ailment?
For sure. No, that's actually how I really got my first recommendation from a doctor, through chronic pain. So my neck and my shoulders primarily are from years of gaming, online gaming, and typing at the computer. Unfortunately, they lock up, they seize up, and experience fair pain every day on those areas.
Wow. And are you still experiencing the pain? And if so, how helpful has marijuana been in dealing, or cannabis been in dealing?
I still deal with the pain. Cannabis is helpful in a number of areas. If it's feeling more inflammation, I'll tend to use like a salve or a topical to put on the affected areas. Oftentimes I find if I smoke some indica, if I go for a run, if I go get a massage, I like it, it's gone for a while. So it's more, it's not going to go away completely, but it helps me maintain, you know, helps alleviate the pain.
Okay. Um, Historically, marijuana has been demonized, subjected to a prohibition. Your presentation at the World's Fair Nano kind of highlighted it. You kind of took the audience through a lot of that history. And I wonder if you could recap some of that here. Take as much time as you want, as much, little.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you start peeling back where cannabis prohibition started. You know, if you go back the last 100 years, that's kind of the most significant. And originally, when you look at it, it became really around racism, right? For lack of a better word. You know, you look at the Harrison Act, that was kind of the initial go against people of Asian descent around the opioid opium issue.
Opium, yeah.
Around that time. And then it was like 1930 where the Narcotics Bureau was formed. And, you know, in order to, you know, get funding and go after a group, it was targeted to two groups, the Mexican group where marijuana essentially got its name, as well as the jazz group with African Americans. And a lot of it was to protect, you know, the women from these groups. And it wasn't until, you know, the mid 30s where you started seeing, you know, propaganda around reefer madness, around, hey, if you smoke cannabis, it'll make you crazy, or these are the people that are affecting and causing crime. And then you fast forward to, you know, the 70s, the Controlled Substance Act ended up coming into play, where you essentially had cannabis as a Schedule 1. One of the most dangerous substances on the planet.
Yeah.
And then you had the war on drugs that started coming on in the 80s. I grew up as a dare kid, right? Like say no to drugs, and so that was very effective on me. You know, I stayed away from it for a very long time because of what I thought it would do you. But it wasn't until 96 where all of a sudden in San Francisco, a man by the name of Dennis Perone, who recently passed, co-authored a bill called Prop 215. And that was the beginning of medical cannabis. And he was motivated around compassion and love because this was a plant that helped his lover, who was going through HIV at the time, who passed, relief in that pain. And so Prop 215 was this idea of people getting together, creating a medical collective to share in each other's, you know, cannabis. And that's what's been the law of the land up until last year, or up until the beginning of this year, where Prop 215 sort of led the way. But then you had other states like Colorado and Washington and Alaska and Oregon, Nevada, Maine, Massachusetts. They started to legalize. So now we have this patchwork of states that have, you know, over 29 states have medical cannabis, 9 have adult use, voted on the will of the people. And what's really interesting now, you're seeing legislative passing of legalization. Vermont this year was a big move forward on that.
Okay. Okay. Our sound is breaking up a little bit. I don't know if we should try getting off and reconnecting, if that would help or not. Let's limp along a little bit more and see how it goes. Maybe it'll fluctuate as we go along.
Okay. Sure.
Acknowledging that you're not a doctor or a psychologist, what do you see as its role in helping people to cope with psychological problems and issues?
So we have a program here called Meadow MD, and it started with one doctor, Dr. Dan Price, who is an ER surgeon that believed in cannabis, used it for his own purposes, so started helping people recommend medical cannabis for their conditions. And, we've seen tens of thousands of patients now with Meadow MD. And
So
when you look at,
this is through your company?
yes.
Yeah. And so is this, do people contact him online?
Yep. Originally, it started with in-home consultations.
Mm-hmm.
But since then, when we started, it was like 2015 when that program launched. It's become more of a telemedicine offering.
Okay.
And the conditions that we see are a pretty wide spectrum, but there are a handful that bubble up to the top. And when you think about medical cannabis and the psychological effects and how people are dealing with mental wellness, you see, sleep being a huge issue. People that can't,
yeah.
You see chronic pain, migraines, stress and anxiety. Stress and anxiety to a point where it's almost paralyzing for people, or just like a way to cope to move ahead with all of the things going on. And medical cannabis has really helped people. It's really helped them, get a good night's sleep so they're functional the next day, or practically eliminate these migraines. For the more serious conditions like cancer and HIV and more like autoimmune diseases like fibromyalgia, then cannabis actually helps alleviate that pain so that they can take their medication, so that they can go to sleep, so that the whatever treatment plan they're on moves them forward.
Just a day or two ago, I was visiting a colleague. We're both retired now, but she had a major stroke. And so I posed the question, is cannabis playing any role in your recovery? And both her and her husband said, oh yeah, huge. And it turns out they had all kinds of paraphernalia on the table that I brought them a pizza, to kind of help contribute to their recovery. And so as they're eating their pizza, they began to point out to me all these various methods for smoking and taking cannabis that were laying on the table right there in front of us. And they both said that it was playing a major role in her recovery. For one, he suffers from chronic environmental allergies, so it helps him to smooth things out. And he said that his 90-year-old mother uses it, I think, in a spray form, if I recall correctly.
Yeah.
And it helps her with arthritis, that she had been very disabled with arthritis, and that she's able to move and go about life with that form of cannabis. So I thought, and this was totally, I guess it was kind of on my mind to ask that question because I knew I was going to be speaking with you. So it's interesting the way these experiences kind of dovetail.
Well, I mean, your demographic, retired, older, are one of the fastest growing demographics using cannabis for their health. We call you boomerangs. So people that have, had it in the past, but now are coming back to it. And are more open to it, not just in plant form, but in topicals and pills and sprays and edibles. It's really just trying to figure out what serves you best.
That's fascinating. Boomerangs. I've been called worse. And that's
you're just coming back to it.
Yeah, that's not a bad expression. What about? I remember that people can get very talkative and very expansive sometimes, in that sort of initial rush of a high. And I'm wondering, do you think it's in any way a treatment for, say, shyness or social anxiety? It's just a question.
Absolutely. I mean, it just depends on what you're consuming, right? Like, if I want to feel that sort of, we call it like the stream of consciousness, where just like that flow is going, and you're just like, where are all these ideas coming from? I would take a red Congolese. It's a land-raised sativa. It's a 12-weeker. It's really strong in THC, but it has that clearness of a high where it allows you to think, way more creatively and energetically around, whatever you're dealing with.
What's a 12-weeker? What do you mean?
It just takes 12 weeks to grow.
Oh, really? That seems short. Yeah.
Oh, well, indoor, it takes a little bit. The cycles can be even shorter. It could be like 8 weeks.
Yeah.
But if you're like social anxiety, so what ends up happening is if you take cannabis that's too potent in THC, you often can come, more paranoia. You can have more anxiety. So there is a limit to sort of where you want to go. And that's why I think we're vibing on the whole microdosing, piece. And I think if you go a little bit, you layer it in, that can help, bring down the anxiety as long as you're finding, a strain that works for you.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Microdosing was one of the things I wanted to discuss. But before I forget, I went on your website, Get Meadow, and I didn't see anything about the medical consultation. I didn't even see about the 1-hour delivery.
Yeah, if you go to getmeadow.com, there's a couple buttons. One says, do you have a medical, recommendation? If you click yes, it'll take you to the menu. If you click no, it will take you to Meadow MD to get your evaluation online with a licensed California physician.
Okay. Well, going back to or sticking with the business aspect here, one of the big challenges in California has been the handling of money because of the issues with the federal government. Banks don't want to be involved. And so the growers and the dispensary people end up with scads of money of cash that they have to deal with.
Scads? How much is a scad? Is that like, how big is that?
It's pretty big.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah.
Heaps.
Yeah. I think of like heaps. It's a lot of little piles that add up to a whole bunch.
Okay.
And so does your software program, the fact that it's online and all, does it somehow get around the banking limitations?
No, not at all. I mean,
you don't take credit cards, for example, over the...
No. A lot of it is cash on delivery. On our point of sale software, where we work with licensed brick and mortar dispensaries, a lot of them are still in cash, or they have an ATM in the store, or some have like a debit card provider that helps them. But credit cards are really kind of non-existent. The Visa and MasterCard rails on where you would do that processing is pretty much off limits until there's some federal legalization.
Yeah. Do you think that's ever going to come along?
Yeah, I do.
You're very optimistic.
I wouldn't be in this if I didn't think that we're going to get there. It makes a lot of sense. We are a country with a lot of issues that I believe cannabis can help with. If you look at the data that's out there, just off the top of my head in Colorado or some of the other licensed states, you have tax revenue that they never had before that are coming in. You're having a decrease in opioid overdoses, which contributes to less burden on the resources that go to treat that. You're seeing incarceration rates go down, so people aren't going to jail for it, which further alleviates some of the resources. And you have trends around mental wellness and less drinking and all these things that are helping people cope and move forward with their life. So yeah, it's right now we're state by state, but if you look at kind of how the rest of the country has dealt with other issues around civil rights, gay marriage, women's rights, it was a state by state piece until we reached some sort of critical mass, and then it went federally legal.
Yeah. Well, right now the federal government that we have is, they're pretty activist in some ways, and in ways that many of us would say looks both harsh and repressive. and they have come in and closed down dispensaries before. What, right now we've got the National Guard on the border to keep the Mexicans on the other side. Uh,
Yeah.
what's going to prevent them from now sending the National Guard to close down dispensaries statewide? I mean, that wouldn't shock me if that were to happen. I wouldn't like it, but it wouldn't shock me.
Yeah, I think that it just really depends on the state and the local municipality on how robust their laws are. On the medical side, you have the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment, which protects the state from having federal intervention, mainly because it prohibits the federal government to use resources against states that have some sort of legalized medical framework. I think that if the feds were to come in, it would be a tough battle because the state has created a pretty robust framework of laws that these operators are operating in. If they were to come in, they'd probably go after people that don't have a license, that aren't following the rules versus the people that are. Mm-hmm. And I would say that they'd probably go a step further and look at people that are doing business illicitly across borders. Interstate versus things that are or operations that are contained within the state. But we, for us, we haven't, seen a lot of operators within California too worried about the federal government.
It's interesting. It's kind of paradoxical because the conservative, it's kind of a liberal versus conservative divide, I think, in many ways. And conservatives have long been champions of states' rights.
Exactly.
But
it's Dana Rohrabacher.
Are they willing to be states' rights? But we also need a federal kind of organization, or else we would be, kind of a chaotic country, I think. So there's always been this issue, I guess, in our government of balancing the two.
Yeah, but you're seeing more bipartisan support for cannabis. You're seeing it because it's generating jobs, it's generating tax revenue. States are strapped. When you look at the incarceration rates and how much money is going into prisons and how much money is going into health, it makes a lot of sense to bring back some revenue generating and pulling back some of the resources that are being spent to bring up the budget.
Yeah. Yeah, so you're saying things that are not in the popular awareness, I think, in terms of reducing incarceration, reducing helping to reduce the opioid epidemic and so on. We don't hear these things on the news. In fact, we hear things that would seem to go counter to that, but I'm assuming that you're kind of on top of following the research and so on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I am deep in the cannabis rabbit hole. And in order to really be a good advocate for this plant and what we're doing, we really need to understand how it integrates within our lives, our regulatory framework, across different industries. So, I tend to look for research and read about the positive effects that cannabis is having, but also, where we could be providing more information or more research to bridge the gap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that people have part of the bad rap that marijuana got back in the day, and I'm sure it exists still today, is the idea that it's a gateway drug, and that it leads to the harder drugs.
Well,
so go ahead.
Yeah, I think that was definitely, I think it's a myth, right? Oftentimes you find that cannabis is not as addictive as heroin, even though they're in the same classification, Schedule 1. And so if you're a drug dealer, you want your person to come back over and over again. But when you look at cannabis, when you legalize it, it ends up being, one of those things, we're not going to a drug dealer to give you other drugs. And what you're finding is kind of the opposite now. It's actually an exit drug, especially when you look at the opioid crisis. It's one of the top killers in the country, right? You know, besides heart
Yeah.
disease or one of those other ones, but
Huge epidemic now.
huge epidemic. And, you know, 68% from one of the pieces of research I see on helping people reduce their opioid use, a 25% reduction in opioid overdoses. So people are using it to get off of what they're currently on, which I find pretty fascinating.
You know, back in the day, again, back in the middle 60s, although I would not say I was a pothead, I was never, I didn't have any
You were
tendency towards,
kind of curious.
I was more than that.
More than that? Okay.
Yeah, more
All
than
right,
that.
Dave.
Well, it was a social thing, you know. It
Yeah.
was what was happening in the counterculture.
Wait, can I ask you, what did you call it? Did you call it like grass, or did you call it pot, or call it like Mary Jane? What was your?
Probably all of those.
All of those?
Called it pot, I think, was
The main one.
Pot and weed, I think,
Mhm.
were both pretty big. And probably marijuana, since we were in graduate school after all.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it was a very social thing, and it was really, you know, there were different elements. I would say partly it was a psycho-spiritual quest, the whole thing about altered states of consciousness, and so there was experimentation also with a range of psychedelics, and I was in the middle of all of that.
I'm
But
jealous. Those are great times.
Yeah,
you
would have liked it. Yeah, my son has been jealous of the 60s as well, as one of my sons. It was quite a time, I must say. But you know, and at the time, if you had said to me or my friends, and someday it's going to be legal, I mean, we certainly thought it should be legal. But I think now it's legal, and it's sort of, it takes away some of the mystique that if I had the desire to be a bad boy today, it wouldn't appeal that much because it's legal. I don't know what young rebels are going to do instead.
You're seeing teen usage actually go down in these legalized states.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And it sort of makes the point that part of what historically it was partly this is our teenage thing or our adolescent rebellion.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you often see prohibition is basically criminalization. And, you know, some of these people that were carrying, you know, less than a gram or a couple of grams can go to jail for it. And the rebellious streak on trying to get something that it shouldn't even be an issue. For younger people.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I always found alcohol, and now I've kind of gone back to alcohol. Just, I guess that's this again. It's the social impact of your cohort group does play a role.
For sure.
And because all the people that I hung out with drifted away after some period of time, as they got kids or jobs or whatever. A lot of people it just wasn't around that much anymore, marijuana or the other substances.
Yeah. Well, now it is.
And so cocktails are in again, you know, and I've never been a heavy user of any of this stuff. So we have alcohol in our house that hardly ever gets touched. But if I go out with my son to go out to dinner, and he likes to have a Manhattan or one of those old-fashioned cocktails.
Sure.
Sometimes I like to have a martini. This is maybe once a month at the most, maybe less frequently than that. So that's sort of.
Man, I would love to get to a day where, you know, one of my favorite places in the planet is Amsterdam, and you know the way they've structured, you know, social use via coffee shops is one of the best things, right? Like, I loved visiting there, consuming cannabis, talking with people, you know, travelers and locals, and having those types of conversations. I know that oftentimes if I go to a bar, the social lubrication eventually, if you stay long enough, devolves.
Oh
And,
yeah, you have to
and
worry about a fight. Is there going to be a fight?
something, it's just, becomes a little bit more aggressive. Whereas
Mhm.
in cannabis, often I can only remember big ideas that aren't actually great ideas the next day, but still they seem big,
Yeah,
or giggling, or just like an openness that's pretty nice. And what's great is the next day I'm not hungover.
yeah, yeah. I totally agree. Um, and somehow those big ideas, some of them must have must have seemed okay in the light of day, given that you've got this business now. You're actually at your place of business. I see workers scurrying around in the background doing who knows what.
Yeah, we're working.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and you're working, and it's working for you. Um,
Well, it's really great just to see all the change happening now. I mean, it's been a bit when you look at how long it's taken for cannabis legalization and for this movement to catch on, for public opinion to catch on. It's taken a long, long time.
yeah,
And finally, in the last few years, we're really seeing acceleration of it to a point where it's not, US is behind. Canada has ramped up significantly in their legalization efforts and in recognizing it. You look at countries like Israel, where they publish probably over 100 research papers a year. We can't even do research here, probably less than 10 papers.
yeah, yeah,
So it's we're behind, but we're also making progress, and we just have to be a part of that change. And that's why if you're going to get into cannabis at all in any part, there's a huge advocacy component to this. You need to fight for it and how it's done properly. You need to look at it from a local view, a state view, and eventually interstate and global view.
yeah, yeah. I know that you're concerned that it's being overtaxed in California.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
yeah, and that's actually going to have the opposite of the desired effect. Tell us about that.
Yeah, taxes are a big problem right now. You essentially have a tax structure for cannabis that is multi-tier. Um, the first tier comes in with the distributor or it's actually with the farmer through a cultivation tax, which is around $150 per pound. And then you have a tax, an excise tax between the distributor and the retailer. So if you're looking at the supply chain, you have your farmer, if you're manufacturing, you have your distribution. The distribution sends it over to the retailer. There's a 15% tax on a 60% markup. So it's an effective rate of 24% right between, the distributor and the dispensary. And then at a local level, you may have a local tax. So in LA, it could be 10% tax for adult use recreational people. It could be 5% for medical. And then you have your sales tax, and your sales tax taxes pretty much all of those taxes. So you're looking at buying an eighth with potentially a 35 to 47% extra tax that wasn't there before. And
So
when you
this could help feed the black market, which ideally legalization would get rid of the black market, but this is an impediment to getting rid of the black market, right?
Yeah. I mean, when you have a black market that doesn't have to deal with those taxes, you create a very competitive environment where the people that are doing it right are penalized through higher taxes. The
So
issue is
you're not
there's,
against taxation or taxing it. It's just that it's being taxed too hard. Is that right?
yeah. I mean, but also it's like, why do we need to tax so hard out of the gate when it's just starting?
Mhm.
Um, when you want to nurture as many of these businesses into the new environment as possible. And, even though we've passed Prop 64 in California with with I think it was 57% margin, there's only 33% of counties within California that actually have some form of legal framework. And so there's these pot deserts that have been created post legalization because there's just no laws. And those people that are operating there previously are now considered black market, even though they may have had a medical collective for the last 10 years serving patients in that area with medical cannabis. And so you have these taxes, you have not enough local permits, you have, lack of sophistication around it, and with the product that can generate $1 billion of taxes if it's done right, especially because you're making money on the sales tax that wasn't necessarily taxed before. So I don't know, I think there's a way to do it where you don't have to overtax, and you can also provide incentives for people to get a permit.
Okay. One of the things, there's a lot of concern about kids getting involved with marijuana. And one of the things, one of the concerns has to do with it and psychedelics, maybe generally, I'm not sure. But I think with marijuana in particular, I think for young brains, it can be demotivational. It kind of sucks out your motivation. I experienced that. It's a wonder that I got through graduate school, in fact.
Yeah,
There were
I agree with
times
that.
when nothing seemed worthwhile. Talk about that. Is that just from taking too much or having the wrong strains, or what's your take on that?
I definitely agree that, young minds, under 21 are still developing, right? But through my personal experience, I think I first smoked when I was 15, 16, right around there. But, I never got into it it wasn't habitual. It was one of those social things every now and then, getting together and going it.
Exactly.
I think for the people that made it habitual, it became escapism.
Yeah.
It became a way to detach from the priorities and responsibilities you have as a young adult, and getting through high school and going to college and all those other things. And those points, it's helpful to scale back, to create an environment where you don't need it to go through your day to day. It should be, you should find other things that motivate you, whether it's sports, whether it's getting involved in, local volunteering piece, trying to find meaning outside where cannabis can then enhance, not necessarily detract you from, your motivation.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And maybe there needs to be, it'd be nice if there were social messages out there about, that they try to do for alcohol, let's say, where, responsible drinking and so on. And we need things like that for marijuana use.
Yeah, but it's also like peer groups, right? It's just really who you hang out with, right? Like I find that, especially with alcohol, you can tend to binge drink if you're with a lot of people. With cannabis, you often if it's a social occasion, people are, hanging out, laughing, having a good time, as long as it's productive, or a way to just connect. That's a little bit different. But yeah, I agree with you. There needs to be more education about what this is and how it affects you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Again, harking back to my early experiences, it seemed like there was a curve where people would be all chatty and talkative and having fun. And if they stayed, which usually they did, everybody's laid out on a couch and kind of just become very, very passive. Was that because of, were we overdosing or just had the wrong strains, or is that still a phenomenon out there in the social world in your experience?
It could be both. It could definitely be both. If you end up smoking too much, it could bring your cognitive ability to a very lower amount.
Yeah.
If you're smoking something or consuming something that's heavy in indica, that's like more of a body high. It's also called couch lock, where you just don't want to sit there, you don't want to move, then, the part of it, oftentimes we see people mixing cannabis with, alcohol or something else, and that can be a contributing factor. It just really depends. But, I think with cannabis use, if you could sort of look at cannabis consumption and alcohol consumption or wine consumption, if you have a glass of wine, what's going to make you feel? If you have a shot of tequila, how it's going to make you feel, or one beer. The dosages have been created there. There's a percentage of alcohol and how you're supposed to deal with it. In cannabis, it's not there yet, right? There's some dosing, and it's a lot of it's coming to market now because it's legalized and because there are regulations for it. And I think as we get more sophisticated with our productization, you'll be able to dose for you what's right in what you're trying to achieve.
Well, as a boomerang, I'm very excited about that possibility. Yeah. I did go to a local dispensary for the first time as maybe part of my preparation for this.
Yeah, R&D.
yeah, right. Doing my research, and they have, and I heard about this from one of my sons. They have these little mint candies that you can get that have 2.5, what is it? Milligrams, and that's the amount that you're going to get. And that makes it very appealing to know that you can start low. My son told me he loves it for when he goes dancing, and sometimes he just bites half of that, and that's all he needs, just to kind
microdose.
And ready to go dancing with his partner and have a great time, and no abuse there, and he's able to use it in a precise way. So I think that's wonderful, that kind of, and the friends whose house I was at, I told you, among the various devices that they had there was a little white tubular device, kind of looking like a small flashlight in a way, that they said it comes preloaded with marijuana oil or something like that, hash oil, but that it meters it out when you
it vibrates.
Yeah, and that there are 3 levels. There's the green level, a little green light, and there's a little blue light level if you click it twice, and a red light if you want more. So that definitely, it's amazing to see the creativity and the inventiveness that's being brought forth out of all of this. All kinds of new, actually exciting possibilities if somebody's at all open to what's going on here.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm incredibly excited about, because the more we learn about the plant, it's not just about the THC percentage. You're finding that because of our endocannabinoid system and our receptors that are there to accept the phytocannabinoids from the plant, there are more cannabinoids that we haven't even seen, that are just, little percentages of the plant. When you look at it, cannabis has been bred for THC, right? We have a whole nother realm now with CBD, where it's non-psychoactive, and it's helped people with epilepsy, people that want a little bit more, not a head high, but a little bit more of a calming effect. And now we can breed plants for CBD. There's also THCA, THCV, CBN, CBG, all of these different cannabinoids that have different effects. And you're finding some are good for appetite suppression, others that are good for sleep. And as we get more research, as we breed plants for these specific cannabinoids, we'll be able to even target not just the dosage, but even the feeling on what you're trying to achieve. And then the other part of it is you have the terpenes. And so terpenes are the smell, the aroma of it, kind of like aromatherapy. When you have a lavender looking smell, it's more of a relaxing. It's like linalool. If you have myrcene or something that's more citrusy or pinene, you're going to have more of an up feeling with like a sativa, like kind of like a Jack Herrera. And, for me, having been in this for a bit now, you can see the genealogy, you can see the different cannabinoids, you can see the different terpenes in lab tests, that you can start really trying to gauge how this is going to affect you. Way more than alcohol.
Yeah. This is making me think of the rainforest, where, we began to discover that and one of the tragedies of the disappearing rainforest is that there may be all sorts of medicines that are there yet to be discovered. So most of our
been with us for perhaps hundreds of thousands of years, right? Millions of years that it's evolved with us with.
Yeah, and most of our medicines have at base, they have a plant base, and then maybe they get synthesized, for mass consumption.
It's also like a cultural thing. I mean, I grew up in an Asian household where, we're used to seeing herbal medicines and herbal, concoctions. Like, we weren't really big believers of pills. But in, our society today, I mean, it's all about pills. We have 4% of the population, but I think we have a crazy amount in the percentage in what we use on a prescription pill basis.
So that sort of takes us into another area of that that big pharma would have monetary motivations to fight and suppress the growth of medical marijuana. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I mean, I think cannabis is hard. You have
people will prevail.
You have tobacco, you have alcohol, you have pharma, you have prisons, you have federal government, you have, so many, I don't know, headwinds, but it's part of why I think if you're going to get into cannabis, if you elect to say you are a cannabis user, you're helping erase that stigma. You're helping move this thing forward. You're helping provide more ammunition against some of these bigger entities out there. But you're also seeing, alcohol and some of these other groups invest in cannabis and try to invest. Constellation Group had a big investment in Canada with one of the holding companies there. They see that cannabis is one of the biggest threats to their business as this thing continues to move. And you can either elect to fight it, you could elect to work with it.
If they were to put their R&D against that, developing the medical possibilities,
they just can't yet, but eventually
it could be a win-win.
Yeah, I mean, we're essentially seeding this economic boom to the Canadians right now, right? When you look at,
I had no idea that it was so big in Canada.
Well, I mean, look at some of the public companies that are out there. I mean, they're billion-dollar companies, and the market size isn't there to necessarily justify the price, but it's one of the only outlets where you can invest into this space. And so these highly capitalized cannabis companies in Canada now have all this capital that they can deploy, and they're deploying it in states like California, and owning the beginnings of an industry where it should be financed from institutional banks here or investors here, but because it's federally illegal, they're afraid to, or don't have the means to. And any business needs working capital. It needs to be able to put in the work to realize the value years later. But right now it's not there. And
what's the federal legal stance in Canada of their federation?
Yeah, it's looking to go legal recreationally or adult use by this fall. They already have a medical program. Yeah, and they're accepting applications for dispensaries and other license types within the supply chain. Canada's moving ahead, and they're also moving ahead internationally by doing trade deals with different countries and exporting their cannabis to those countries.
Huh. What about the banking? The banking, constriction that we have here is. Do we see that Canadians won't have that obstacle?
They really don't have it as have as big a hurdle as we do.
Uh-huh. You've got a 2-year-old, right? A 2-year-old little girl. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hazel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, congratulations on that. And how
Thank
do you,
you.
yeah, what will be her, as a parent, how are you going to socialize her towards or around marijuana?
Yeah.
I
I
don't know
mean,
if you thought about
I
that.
think it's like, I don't know, when you were growing up and you were with your parents, what was alcohol treated like? Or, what were pills treated like? Or what was, you know, for me, I think she gets to be born in an area, like I'm hoping, where there's not a lot of stigma, or the stigma is gone from this. Um, you know, I'm going to advocate that she doesn't use it for a very long time, but understand what people are using it for, and having empathy for and appreciation for the diversity of ailments and conditions that could be used to treat with. Um, but if you were to tell me, she goes to college, and I'd be more worried about alcohol or cannabis, I'd be more worried about alcohol, right?
Sure.
I would be like, go cannabis way more than alcohol, because I've seen bad things happen with alcohol. So it's a lot of just education, I think, and telling them why we're doing what we're doing, and how it's helping, but not
Yeah.
necessarily put this stigma on it that we've had to grow up with.
Yeah. Yeah. And your wife is involved in this as well, right? I heard on another podcast that you were on that she's working on a recipe book for uh, cannabis recipes.
Yeah, your research is on point, doctor. Um, yeah, my wife is in the industry. She's a low dose edible maker. So she makes these 5 milligram marshmallows called Mellows, mainly because her experiences with edibles have been, we've had some pretty bad experiences by taking too much.
Yep. Yep.
Um, so she, like you were saying, microdosing. She created low dose options. She has a book coming out with Chronicle at the sometime this year called Edibles. So it's a whole book with her and her partner Corrine, who've created low dose options for people to create in their own home kitchen.
That sounds great. That sounds great. I had some very negative experiences back in the day with marijuana brownies or hash brownies,
Ah, the
where,
magic brownie.
yeah, where, you know, um, when I when I later had to go to bed and probably made the mistake often of consuming these things too late in the day.
Yeah,
People get together in the evening, and then my brain was going a million miles an hour
yeah,
and cannot get to sleep.
no,
And there were times when I thought, oh no, I'm going to have to check myself into an emergency clinic, and I
yeah,
just the shame of that got me through not got me
yeah.
through the night.
I
So
mean,
low
I
dose sounds great.
I agree with you. I mean, the cool thing about cannabis is you're not going to overdose on it, right? There's still zero reported deaths of overdosing. And I think what you realize is when you eat too much edible, you're in for a roller coaster ride that eventually will stop. The cart's not going to go off the rails. You're not going to die,
Yep.
but you definitely need to hydrate, eat, try to burn through it, and maybe put on a record and just try to, or some people bring out coloring books or pads or whatever to keep your mind and body occupied, so you're not freaking out.
Yeah, that would have been a good suggestion back then. I wish I knew you then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like your business is actually thriving. I heard you on this other show say it started off with something like 10 orders a day, and that was a huge day. A lot of rejoicing and celebration. Oh boy, we're alive.
I mean, when yeah, they're using it.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And then I think you said you had moved into the realm of maybe like 1,000 orders a day.
Yeah. Thousands of orders a day. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's got to feel good.
It feels great. Yeah, I think I think the thing that I'm most proud of is just the team that we've been able to build, and the way we've done it has been more sustainable. We've tended to focus on providing value to our partners, and these partners are dispensaries that are using our software to help them be compliant, to help them with their operations, but also to provide an interface that's friendly, that helps them get the job done without feeling like they're in the .NET Windows 95 era. We're talking about modern software with modern tools to tackle this industry, according to the new rules that have been, created.
Yeah. What are your, if you can talk about it, do you have any dreams for the future that as you to grow your business in one way or another?
Yeah, I mean, for the foreseeable future, in startup land, we're really focused on California. There's a lot to do here. It's such a big state. There's so many municipalities and counties with different varying laws and education levels on it that we really need to focus. But there are a lot of markets that are opening up that take time, right? Even though Vermont legalized, they still have perhaps years until they actually get those laws get implemented. So I think if we focus on California and other states are adopting what California does, we'll have an opportunity of going outside the state. But I'm looking at this not just where California is, but also as a producer, right? If we have federal legalization, you're going to be able to buy, just like you buy a bottle of Napa wine in New York, you'll be able to buy some Kush from LA, or some Blue Dream from a grower in Mendocino. I would love to see that future, right, where we are exporting our products to other people that don't have access.
All right. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we go off?
No, I just appreciate the time. I think the biggest thing I can say for any of the listeners that do consume cannabis or are kind of curious or know people that do, really step forward and, admit or advocate for it. It takes the power of the people to really change the opinion, the stigma. And as people get more educated about it and adopt this into their lifestyle, it can only be better. So, I think that's the big one.
Okay, well, great. Well, I really appreciate you sharing all of this with us and being as open as you have been about it.
Sure,
And,
my pleasure.
and I wish you all the luck with your business and with your evangelical work, spreading the word. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
David, thanks for being my guest today on Shrink Wrap Radio.
You're very welcome.